Hi everyone, welcome to my professional development presentation. So what I'm going to talk about today is the topic of adolescent pregnancy. Throughout the presentation I might also call it teenage pregnancy. They kind of go hand in hand, adolescent pregnancy, teenage pregnancy, one and the same. It's an interesting topic, in my opinion. It wasn't something that was very prevalent in my high school. I think at graduation we had one student who walked who was pregnant, but it's not the case in different parts of the country or in bigger cities and lower SES neighborhoods. Tends to be much more prevalent. So although it wasn't something that I saw personally throughout high school or middle school, it is a prevalent topic in the US, and it's just interesting to me because not only are the teenage mothers and teenage fathers put at risk, but it also involves the newborn child, so there's kind of a lot of factors in the situation that are going along that we need to address, we need to prevent. So I just thought it was an interesting topic overall. When I was considering who I would present my professional development to, it was kind of a hard place to pick because teenage pregnancy prevention is kind of half on teachers and faculty administration, and the other half of it is on parents. So it's not all parents' job, but it's not all school's job. So this is important. So we kind of need a space where parents are in the same room, we need a space where faculty are in the same room, and if they're together, that's even better. So I was thinking maybe a back to school night or some kind of community organization where both parents are present and faculty and staff are present. That would be an ideal place to present research and information on this topic, because it does involve both parties. So that's who I would present to. Some of the topics that I'll go over in this presentation and I would go over in a real professional development situation is just some background information on pregnancy rates right now in the US. I'll talk about some at-risk issues that are involved with teenage pregnancy. I'll propose some interventions. I'll go over the interventions that are in place now that aren't working so well, and new ones that we can begin to implement. And I'll talk about some counseling techniques and a few future implications for those interventions that I'm going to talk about. So first, to start with some of the background information, right now in the US, our teen pregnancy rates are at a historical low. So between the years of 1991 and 2005, the teen pregnancy rate has decreased by 34%. So that is a significant number, and it shows a lot that there was a lot of interventions that were used that were successful. Again, it is a long time ago. We don't always think of 2005 as being that long ago, but realistically it's 10 years. But so there was that downward, a good downward spiral of the teenage pregnancy rates in the US. But although we are at a historical low compared to other countries in the industrialized world, so these are countries that we have a lot of things in common with, countries like Canada, Sweden, the UK, the pregnancy rates in the US are actually double that of those countries. So although we are at a historical low, compared to those countries, we still are at an incredible amount of pregnancies compared to where they are. So that's something we have to work in. We have to kind of progress even further to resemble those countries a little bit more. Out of all the pregnancy cases in the US each year, between 75% and 86% of them are unintended. So they are not planned, accident cases, I guess you would call them. And for women generally, unintended pregnancies can be very stressful. So on a teenager, they are just doubly as stressful. The unintention is usually a result from extended time alone with their partner, impulsivity, which we know is common in teenagers, substance abuse, which alters their cognitions, it alters their judgment, peer pressure or pressure from their partner, violence, and lack of knowledge of contraception is usually what leads to such a high unintended rate. So out of all the births that occur in the U.S., African American and Hispanic teenagers, specifically between the ages of 15 and 19, have the highest occurrence of live births. African American teens being a little bit higher than Hispanic. And the rate of African American teens, they give birth to 77 babies per 1,000. So for every 1,000 babies that are born, 77 of them belong to African American teenagers between 15 and 19. So that's a pretty significant amount. In a study that I found, they said that 66.7% of sexually active teenagers revealed that if they were to become pregnant, they wouldn't know what to do. So they wouldn't know what their first step would be. They wouldn't know who to contact, or in the report it even said some of them wouldn't even have known how it happened, which is a little bit alarming. And then in the same study, they reported that 81% admitted to having had worried about a possible pregnancy. So almost 82% of high school students reported being nervous about being pregnant, or they were nervous that they had gotten somebody pregnant, which is an incredibly high number. So that should definitely be addressed. And then teens typically experience fear, confusion, guilt, worry, at even the thought of becoming pregnant or actually becoming pregnant. And a lot of them reported that they would deny the existence of their pregnancy, which is, we know, is dangerous because it prevents them from doing things like seeing a doctor, getting their prenatal vitamins, which could ultimately hurt themselves in the long run and their child. So that's something that has to be addressed as well. So that's all a little bit of background knowledge. Some of the at-risk issues that teenage moms and teenage dads are at risk for, health issues is a big one. So in the mother specifically, health issues can include poor maternal weight gain, so they don't gain enough weight during their pregnancy, preterm birth, pregnancy-induced hypertension can occur. They often give birth to low-weight babies, and neonatal death is also at higher risk for teenage pregnancies. Risks vary with the age of the mother, so the younger a teen mother is, the higher her chances of giving birth to a stillborn baby, or developmental issues, all things like that. And then teen mothers are also less likely to breastfeed, which we know has positive outcomes for both the mother and the child. So teens who lack in breastfeeding are ultimately hurting themselves and hurting their children. So after health issues, we have some social and emotional issues. The most common social issues in teen mothers include depression, they have a poor quality of life, they have a poor mental health, poor psychological functioning, and they have poor mother-infant relationships and interaction, which is unfortunate. And then for the children of teen parents, the most common issues include poor adaptive skills, so they don't adapt as well as their peers. There's often delayed language skills, and there's often delayed social and emotional development. So sometimes they can be behind their peers socially, mentally, which is also unfortunate. There, a lot of times, are academic issues with teen parents. They complete significantly less schooling than their peers who do not experience pregnancy. On average, teen parents attend 1.1 to 2.2 less years of school. So nearly 2 years of school is the amount that they miss due to a pregnancy. Teen fathers, same number. They also don't complete as much schooling, and as a result, they have fewer job opportunities. Of teen mothers, 59% of them drop out of high school. 50% of them will have to repeat a grade. And then of the 41 who do complete high school, less than 2% of them will continue to earn a college degree. So although 41 is a little bit shy of half, only 2% of those will ever earn either an associate's or a bachelor's or anything higher than that. So that number is really surprising. It's obviously very hard to keep them in school once they've had a baby. Which leads into the next issue, which is financial issues. The economic cost of teen moms and teen dads in the U.S. is $9.4 billion for taxpayers. The reason the number is so high is because it includes the loss of income for teen mothers and teen fathers. It includes the loss of income tax. They have high health care costs that they can't pay for. They're often on public assistance, so they have food stamps and welfare and assisted housing. So those are all things that taxpayers are paying for. A lot of children end up in foster care, which is also paid for by taxpayers. And we're also paying for the high rate of incarceration, both in the children of teen parents and oftentimes teen fathers. So that is why that number is so high. Teen mothers are also more likely to live below the poverty line, and they're more likely to learn less per hour compared to their peers who don't give birth to a child during high school or at the age of 19. So those are all just some risks associated with teenage pregnancy. So in an attempt to continue to decrease the amount of pregnancies that we have and to prevent students from being at risk for those kind of issues, there are interventions put in place at schools and at home. So I'm going to go over some of those interventions, but before I get to the interventions that work, I want to talk about some that have been proven to not work, so some failed interventions. So until very recently, only abstinent-only programs, which I might call AOP, so AOP stands for abstinent-only programs. So until very recently, the only federally funded safe-sex programs were AOPs, so ones that kind of preached abstinence and abstinence only. Only those were federally endorsed and federally funded. However, recent studies have come out that proved AOPs actually increased the amount of pregnancies in schools where those programs were held and taught to students. So, turns out that the abstinent-only programs actually increased teenagers having sex and becoming pregnant unintentionally. So recently, President Obama has cut $170 million in funding for AOPs, and he and his administration promised to only fund programs that were proven to decrease teenage pregnancies. So I think there's slowly but surely going to be a shift in the kind of interventions that schools are using, and hopefully the amount of abstinent-only programs decreases because they were proved to not work. The other kind of intervention that we know doesn't work is the lack of parent discussion between parent and teenager. So when parents fail to tell their students about contraception and safe sex and peer pressure, that actually increases the likelihood that a student will engage in unsafe sex, or they make risky sexual behavior, or they engage in that, and then they unintentionally become pregnant. So specifically, African American and Spanish mothers reported the lowest level of discussion between parent and child, and they were more reluctant because they were fearful that the discussions would actually encourage their students, their sons and their daughters, to go out and behave sexually. They didn't want to endorse that, so they just didn't talk about it at all. And they were afraid of how awkward the conversation would be. So for fear that it would be too awkward, they just didn't have the discussion at all. However, what we found is that teens look toward their parents for information. Teenagers view their parents as the most important influence on their sexual decision making. But of teens surveyed, they showed that less than 25% have actually had a conversation with their parents, grandparents, guardian about sex. So although they value their parents' opinion, they don't get to have that conversation, and it ultimately results in either STDs or risky behavior or teenage pregnancy. So that's definitely something that if parents were at this kind of community night, we can talk to them and let them know that their students are looking to them for information, and they just kind of have to be brave and have the conversation. Okay, so those are two interventions that don't work, is the abstinence only and the lack of information, are definitely not working toward decreasing the number of pregnancies. But interventions that have been proven to work. So this first one, everyone might have seen it in their high school. I know I partook in a similar kind of scenario in my high school. It's called Baby Think It Over. So what Baby Think It... Okay, sorry about that. My camera died on me. So Baby Think It Over. Baby Think It Over involves a life-size infant simulation doll. The goal of Baby Think It Over is to alter the adolescent's perception on how hard it is and how much is involved when caring for a baby. And the goal is also to try and increase their intent to avoid any risky sexual behavior. That way they can avoid ultimately becoming a parent. So Baby Think It Over is this little computerized doll. Maybe, like I said, you guys, you got to bring it home for a weekend in high school, or you saw your friends with it. I know I did it. But they're doing this program with Baby Think It Over in some of the most densely populated cities in the U.S. They're also doing it in cities with very low SES neighborhoods. So each student gets to carry around the baby for 2.5 days, so 2.5 days. Within that time period, the baby is scheduled to cry between 30 and 35 times, and the baby ceases crying when the student cares for it or tends to it. So it feeds it, it changes it, it cradles it, or just kind of cuddles it to make it feel warm and secure. Any mishandling is recorded by the baby, so if it is dropped or the students handle it too roughly, it's all recorded. And what I think is really interesting, what my high school didn't do with these simulated babies, these cities the schools conduct group discussions. They bring in community agencies to conduct lessons, and or they go on trips and visits to these agencies. There's also classroom presentations by the teacher. So the students get these babies for a couple days, and then there's discussion and reflection, and there's involvement with these real life people who deal with teenage pregnancies on a regular basis in the community. So I think that ties everything in really great, so they don't just get the experience, but they get to reflect on it, which is really important. So that's one intervention that I think is pretty promising, and it has a really good impact on students. The next intervention that I found was a innovated computerized simulation game. That's a mouthful. This is specifically targeted toward male adolescents, where a baby Think It Over is for both male and female. So this computerized game, every male in the school participates in the game, and they get a character. And the character gets this lived experience, is what they called it. So he goes about his day, he goes to school, he has a girlfriend, and in this situation, the character, the girlfriend of the character becomes pregnant. So then by answering a series of multiple choice questions, each male has the opinion or the option to raise the baby. So he can stay with the significant other and raise the baby. The boy can also opt to leave the girlfriend, and the boy can also opt to persuade the girlfriend to consider abortion. So it goes through his day. If say he chooses to, you click A and it's stay with girlfriend. So then they go about some more time, and time passes, and they choose B, and they choose to live together. And then he chooses C, which he's employed in a part-time job. And depending on what they pick, this character goes through a lived experience. So it's kind of cool. They get to see what kind of outcomes their choices yield. And it's different for every male. It was just something pretty interesting I found. I thought it would be a really cool addition to schools. 2/3 of the males that played the game reported that the game made them seriously reconsider, and they thought that they would never want to get into a situation at their age. So it did have some powerful impacts on them, which I think is really, really important. One intervention that there's been a lot of debate about is the teen pregnancy, or revolving around teen pregnancy, is 16 and Pregnant and Teen Mom. So these might sound familiar. They are TV shows on MTV. They debuted in 2009, and they intended to show young people and teenagers the honest, unpleasant truth of pregnancy, teen pregnancy specifically. And a couple reports were done, and what was found that young girls whose they had high exposure to these TV shows were broken into two categories. So for some teenagers, it did increase their likelihood of engaging in sexual activity, but the other half were proven to actually decrease their amount of risky behavior. And it all depended on whether or not her father or a positive male role model in her life had discussed safe sex with her. So the students who watched Teen Mom and whose fathers communicated with them, her likelihood of engaging in a risky sexual behavior actually decreased as a result. And vice versa for girls who watched Teen Mom whose father did not communicate with them. Her likelihood actually increased. So there is some proof that Teen Mom and 16 and pregnant actually did help to decrease the rates of teen pregnancy, but only if parents took the advantage to discuss the dangers and the right way to use contraceptives and things like that. So it has a possibility to really influence teenagers, but parents have to take the initiative to also discuss with them. One last intervention that I found really helpful was peer education. So peer education is the teaching and sharing of health information by members of a similar age or status. So that would be like somebody in college going to talk to high school students about safe sex. It's somebody who they can relate to, somebody who's around the same age as them. It has a lot of advantages, including it appeals to adolescents because the peer leader is not seen as this authority figure or this big scary adult. Instead, they're just kind of a member of their own group, so it's somebody who's similar to them. They have similar backgrounds most times. They have similar interests. They use the same kind of language. And young teenagers tend to talk more openly when they feel comfortable. Odds are they talk more openly around their peers. So if you find somebody who's kind of in the same age range, you might get them to open up about subjects that they wouldn't normally with teachers, like HIV or STDs or condoms, safe sex, things like that. So peer education is kind of new and upcoming, and I think it can be really beneficial for students. Okay. So lastly, some counseling techniques that I thought were really helpful, especially as future counselors. So one of the important things to know is whether a mother and father, teen mother and father, plan on parenting, if they plan on abortion, or if they plan on adoption. Because you would counsel them differently. Higher levels of physical, psychological, and emotional issues are associated with adolescents who opt for adoption and abortion. So these students, you might have to focus on psychological issues rather than parenting skills. They're more emotionally unstable. As far as prevention, school counselors can focus on self-esteem and locus of control. It was proven that adolescents with a high self-esteem and internal locus of control may actually be less socially vulnerable. They have better coping skills, and they resist peer pressure more than peers who have low self-esteem and an external locus of control. So in groups or counselors can teach lessons in the health class about high self-esteem and internal locus of control, because that's actually been proven to help students decrease the rate of which they engage in risky sexual behavior. So that's really important for counselors. And counselors can work as advocates for their school. They can talk to administration about incorporating service learning programs into their school. For example, there's schools all over the state of Texas. The Texas Department of Health developed this program for students between the ages of 14 and 17. And they've implemented programs that emphasize school success, career exploration, all these great things, and it's all through volunteer work. And they showed that the program's goals, which are to protect youth from not only teen pregnancy but other negative behaviors, their goal has actually kind of come to life, and they've been able to really succeed at their goal. The rate of teen pregnancy has dropped in the schools that these programs were implemented in. So I guess if the students kind of feel involved and they feel part of their community, just the same as if they were involved in their school, kind of giving them a purpose and importance, again, it kind of is linked to that self-esteem, so their self-esteem will be higher, and they won't kind of engage in these behaviors as much. So those were kind of all the future implications that I found that counselors can use for the future. I hoped that you guys learned something and you maybe heard something that you didn't already know. So that is my professional development on teen pregnancy. Thank you for listening.